to know, okay, this is a warning to believers. It's going to help understand, where he's going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, well, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I was gonna say in the super controversial, or apparently, well, from what I've seen, controversial chapter 6 when everyone's like, oh, that means you can lose your salvation. Like, maybe that's a good thing.
Chapter 10 also has
Maybe that's a good point to remember that he's talking to Christians, even though at the end he says, he's got I think he said I have better hope for you, or there's, I don't know if it was chapter 6.
Chapter 6.
6 and 10 both are probably the two most controversial. That's what leads a lot of expositors to say that they think he's talking to unconverted, because how could these warnings be applied to Christians? But we're going to get into that when we get there, and that's some of the meat.
But then that's a good undertone to have, yeah. Okay.
I'm just saying it's a good foundation to understand. He's talking to believers.
Okay.
Therefore, how can we understand this in light of other scriptures we've studied?
So Paul wrote a letter to believers, to Jews who are believers.
In summary, probably Paul wrote a letter to certainly Jews who were certainly believers somewhere that we don't know. So anyway, kind of the conclusion of the introduction was I kind of wanted to give what I see as the underlying theme of what Hebrews is talking about, and it goes from the author. I'm going to say the author, even though I think it's Paul. I'm not going to say Paul. The author said, "This is true of Christ. This is what we know about Christ. This is Christ who is superior to, depending on where he is, the angels. This is Christ is superior to Moses. This Christ is superior to Aaron." And then there's the subsequent warning. Therefore, let us pay, chapter 2, verse 1, let us pay close attention to what we've heard. Or, therefore, take care, brothers, 3 verse 12, lest there be any of you an evil and unbelieving heart. So he tells, this is what we know about Christ. This is what we know of who Jesus is. And this is why Jesus is superior to pretty much the rest of the stuff within Judaism, everything up to this point. Therefore, and then he gives the warning.
I didn't know angels were or were angels a big part of Judaism?
Big part, they're definitely in there. They're mentioned throughout the Old Testament, probably not as frequently.
Yeah, that's what. Well, I don't know why he would use that as a I kind of have to think really hard about times where there's angels in the Old Testament. So why would he, use?
The angels came and spoke to the prophets in different times, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah. And one thing we're going to get into in chapter 1 and chapter 2.
Oh yeah, the law.
There's little hints that the angels had to do with the giving of the law.
Yeah. Okay. Good point then.
And that's kind of Paul's whole ministry is. It's not about law. It's about grace. Mm-hmm. It's not about works. It's about faith. And it's so if what was given by angels, like chapter 2, verse 2, for since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? So it's if what was given by angels was important and good and profound, and you had consequences if you neglected it, how much more important? Because he just talked about how much superior Jesus is to the angels, and so that's kind of the theme of the book. Is bam, here's who Christ is. This is the position that Jesus is. Therefore, be careful. Therefore, hold on.
Anytime there's a therefore, you need to pay attention. Whenever Paul says therefore in anything, it's.
What's it there for? Yep.
Oh, that's a good. I never thought
Therefore,
about that.
You've never heard that?
Really?
I thought that's what you were about to say.
I know, me too.
Now that I should.
Now he will.
Maybe I won't say that.
Right, so this is the themes, the encouragement, and the subsequent exhortations. Now, the last thing I wanted to say about the introduction is something that Paul, I said I wasn't going to say Paul, the author of Hebrews says a couple times, and he just kind of bounces off of it and just kind of grazes over it, and it's easy to miss if you're just reading it, but it's important because the fact that he doesn't make a big illustration of what he's talking about, to me, implies that the reader, or the original audience, the original reader, already kind of knew where he was going with it. And that's a couple times in here he talks about the promises. And I'll give you one example here in chapter 7, verse 6. I'll read a little bit before talking about Melchizedek and Abraham. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people. I'm going a little further. In verse 6, but this man does not have his descent from them received. This man who does not have descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Like, what promises? He blessed him who had the promises. And like, there's a few times throughout there he talks about those who through patience, in chapter 11, inherit the promises. And so there's this kind of, a few times you just, and these guys, they're going to inherit the promises. Okay, going on. Like, hold on, pause, Paul, what are you talking about? What promises are you talking about? Well, here, he's talking about Abraham. There were promises given to Abraham by God. But then in chapter 11, it doesn't even talk about Abraham. It talked about Abraham, but just everybody else throughout the Old Testament. If you're familiar with Hebrews chapter 11, they call it the faith chapter.
The Hall of Faith.
The Hall of Faith, exactly. By faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Moses, by faith, the prophets, by faith, David. But then, I guess.
Is that in chronological order?
Yeah.
All the people he lists off?
Yep.
How organized.
How Pauline of him. And in verse 11, verse 39, and all these, all the Hall of Faith people, though commended through their faith, did not receive the promises, since God had provided something better for us. What? They didn't receive the promises. What does that mean? What promises are we talking about? And that kind of springboards into chapter 1, because chapter 1, he's like, throughout the book, he's referencing things in the Old Testament. But in chapter 1, he starts with David, and he talks about promises that were made to David. Chapter 1, verse 5, I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. That was the promise to David of his son Solomon, and of his son's kingdom. That he will receive a kingdom, and of that kingdom there will be no end. Like, wait a minute. Solomon is still alive? No, Solomon died. Well, his kingdom went on, so his children. No. His children eventually went into idolatry, and the kingdom was cut off, and they went into Babylonian captivity. So what does that mean? Of his kingdom there will be no end. That's fulfilled in Christ. And so there's a partial fulfillment in Solomon, but either Paul or whoever else wrote Hebrews says that it's talking about Christ right here in chapter 1. For to which of the angels did God say, you're my son, today I've begotten you? Or again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Saying that was said about Jesus. Jesus is going to be the one who has the kingdom that has no end. Jesus is the one that chapter 1, verse 5, the first verse, you are my son, too. That's, it's a famous passage in Psalm verse 2. Have you ever heard, what's that song? Ask of me, I'll give the nations to you.
What did you say, Psalm?
That's Psalm 2, the same passage right there. Today you are my son, today I've begotten you. Ask of me, and I'll give the nations as your heritage. Like, so it's talking about Jesus in his
So
kingdom.
it kind of like, they would have known what comes right after that.
They would,
most
yeah,
likely.
like he's referencing the passage, but as Paul often does, when he's referencing a passage,
He knows what's around it too.
he's referencing the whole passage, and he's just kind of giving the highlight of it.
That's like a really good point to like. I don't ever think about that either. Like, because obviously we don't know the whole we don't have all the scriptures like memorized, or like we don't know that this came from right here. Wow, like no, it doesn't connect like that. Like it
But you got
probably
the
did for
little,
them.
you got the little numbers in the middle. That
Oh yeah, but I'm pretty lazy most of the time. I actually didn't look. I think I only looked up one of these Old Testament verses. I was just like, it's in there. It's probably in there. I probably should have done that first. That's probably.
But I mean, that's kind of what my point is like we'll kind of read through it. Oh yeah, you're my son. Today we got you. Great. Oh, I'll be
That's
the
the
father
Bible,
be a
right?
son. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm sure God said that to Jesus.
Mhm.
Like, no. What is he saying there? I'll be your father, and you'll be me a son. Like, yeah, okay. He didn't say that to the angels. But when did he say that? He said that to David about his son Solomon, sort of, but really to David about his son Jesus and his kingly reign. His kingly reign on the earth.
Of the nation.
I'll give the nations as your heritage, and of his kingdom there will be no end. And then when you go down, he says,
Or again.
let all the angels of God worship him.
Okay.
In Deuteronomy, he talks about there's going to be a coming one who all of his enemies are going to be subdued before him. That wasn't true of Jesus' first ministry. He was nailed to a cross. That will be true when Jesus comes again. And so all these verses are talking about.
Psalm 22 is the one where it talks about it's the prophetic one, Almighty, everyone's surrounding him and like they're mocking him, and It's like the really okay. Well, isn't there like a twin